They threw a brick through the window and struck a newborn in the head, just because the Gray's family violated HOA rules. In that instant, everything changed. Nick and Allison Gray stood frozen, their world collapsing around them. The brick, the shattered glass, the lifeless body of their baby son, Logan, lying in Allison's arms. So much chaos from a single moment of unwarranted violence. The two men in tactical vests who had initiated this tragedy were long gone, their black truck already fading into the distance before help could arrive. A siren wailed as the ambulance approached. But in those moments, all Nick could hear was the sound of his own heart pounding madly in his ears. "Allison, call 911 again," he shouted, barely able to find his voice through sheer panic. "We need help right now." "Logan." Allison's voice was hoarse as she rocked her baby, blood staining her sleeve, turning her tears into a waterfall of despair. "Please, stay with us." As Nick dialed, his thoughts spiraled into darkness. He knew the local HOA never gave second chances. They had micromanaged every resident to a choking degree, targeting whoever dared to step outside their rigid rules. And now, this was the price for being human. The HOA had sent a message, and it was clear. Either comply or face the consequences. Eventually, the darkness gave way to flashing lights, and the paramedics hurried inside. Nick couldn't do anything but watch them work, powerless as they loaded Logan onto a stretcher. He could barely breathe as the door swung shut behind them. Later, in the sterile chaos of the hospital, the sterile white walls closing in around him, he gripped a jagged shard of brick and realized it was time to fight back. "Detective Wells." Nick approached the officer, desperation etched on his face as he clutched the evidence tightly. "We have to do something about them. They're not just breaking windows, they're breaking families." Wells nodded, his expression weary but serious. "You have to understand, Nick, HOA enforcement isn't like the police. They can be aggressive, but proving intent is tricky. They meant to hurt us," Nick insisted, his voice rising. "That brick didn't fly through the window by accident." Wells crossed his arms, contemplating the situation. "Look, if you think they've crossed the line, I can take your statement. But without strong, direct evidence," he warned, "it's just word against word. They might even claim mistaken identity." "Then let's gather evidence," Nick replied. "We can dig into their practices. Reach out to the community. There must be more people they've threatened or harassed." As if summoned by his resolve, a nurse walked by with an exhausted smile. Seeing their solemn faces, she stopped. "Is everything all right? Do you know anything about a tactical unit connected to the Oak Ridge HOA?" Nick pressed. Her smile faded. "I know they've been overstepping," she admitted, glancing nervously around. "No one wants to get involved, but I've heard whispers. Teachers with strict reports, parents afraid to let their kids play outside. Just be careful. They don't mess around." Those words lingered in Nick's mind. What if the brick was just the catalyst to bring the community together? If he could unite the voices of those who felt powerless against the HOA, perhaps they could stand a fighting chance. Back in the Gray's family home, the air was thick with tension. While Logan spent the night under observation, his tiny body fighting for life, Nick turned to his laptop, eyes narrowing at the glaring screen. He hacked through the HOA's weak defenses. A flood of emails and secret communications spilled forth, more intricate than he had ever imagined. Names surfaced: Kelly Mason, the HOA president, crowned in all her authority like a dictator. The arrogance of their statements sizzled with malice. It was clear they believed they were untouchable. One email jumped off the screen, a threat. "If the city won't act, we'll enforce it ourselves." Nick's determination cemented into hard steel. "Allison," he called out, urgency in his tone. "I think I've found something we can use." She appeared, her eyes hopeful yet weary. "What is it?" "It's not just about us anymore. They're enforcing rules like a police state. Look at these emails. I can prove they're corrupt." She leaned over his shoulder, gasping as familiarity turned to realization. "This is bad, Nick. This is really bad. They need to be stopped." And for the first time, something ignited within them, a quiet fury that promised retribution. Fueled by purpose, they quickly drafted messages to nearby families for support, contacted local journalists, and reached out to advocacy organizations. What began as personal loss transformed into a movement that would resonate throughout Oakage Drive. Every night, they stayed up late, compiling data, filling in gaps, slowly uncovering a tangled web of intimidation tactics and hidden agendas. They weren't just going to announce their intent to fight back. They would expose the truth, and in doing so, they would reclaim their community. Everyone deserves a safe place to live, Allison murmured as they printed flyers filled with their story, their motivation palpable. Nick nodded, sentiment filling the silence between them. People will see that they are not alone. We're going to make sure they feel the weight of what they did. With every passing hour, tension turned to hope, fear to action. This was bigger than the brick that shattered their window. This was about survival, justice, and, ultimately, reclaiming their community for every parent who feared stepping out of line. And as the oppressive Georgia heat began to simmer into the night, Nick couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to unleash a tidal wave of change. He was ready to hit back. With every passing hour, tension turned to hope, fear to action. This was bigger than the brick that shattered their window. This was about survival, justice, and, ultimately, reclaiming their community for every parent who feared stepping out of line. Nick and Allison worked tirelessly, fueled by a shared determination that wrapped around them like a lifeline. They stayed up late into the night, printing flyers filled with their story, using every ounce of technology Nick could muster to organize and analyze the evidence laid bare before them. The unearthed emails, the narratives of other families caught in the HOA's web of intimidation. Logan deserves to grow up in a safe neighborhood, Nick said, running a hand through his hair as he stared at the glowing screen. If we don't fight this, who will? Allison nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk as if it were a tether keeping her grounded. Let's include all the families we found. We need their voices. Together is the only way we can stand against them. The next morning, they held a meeting at their home. Local families from the neighborhood gathered in droves, some bringing dishes of food, some just filling the space with palpable anxiety. When the doorbell rang, Nick opened it to find their neighbors, people he'd seen around the block, but never truly connected with, ready to share their stories. Each of them, once timid, now stood united against a common enemy. Thank you all for coming, Nick said, sweeping his gaze over the faces in the room. What happened to Logan, he paused, fighting back tears, was not just an attack on us. It's an attack on all of us. We can't let this continue. Slowly, stories began to unfold among murmurs. A mother described her son being approached by the so-called enforcement unit for riding his bicycle too close to the grass. Another spoke about threats of fines for her garden losing its approved status. Each account wove a deeper narrative, one of fear, oppression, and the desperate need for change. One voice broke through the noise, a father named Greg who stood tall, arms folded defiantly. These HOA members think they are above the law. They act like they can intimidate us into submission. But why are we letting them? We all have the right to be heard. Encouraged by his fervor, the group erupted into conversations, ideas bouncing around. Each story lit a fire in the others, a fire that had been smoldering far too long, now ready to blaze. Let's gather stories from the community. We can take this to the media, suggested Laura, a single mother who experienced pressure to keep her children from playing in the street. They can't ignore us if we come together. Nick nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude at the resolve igniting in the hearts of those gathered. It was clear, they were no longer just fighting for Logan. They were fighting for everyone's right to live peacefully. After the meeting, Nick and Allison got to work organizing everything. They created a digital platform where residents could submit their stories anonymously, and within days, their small website began filling up with testimonials. Each submission was a piece of the puzzle, painting a picture of corruption that the HOA had carefully hidden for years. Meanwhile, the ripples of their effort reached beyond Oakage Drive. News outlets began to pick up their calls for action, and local lawmakers expressed interest in reviewing HOA practices across their region. Slowly, the town was waking up. But as the momentum built, so did the pressure. Rumors spread that the HOA board was not sitting idly by, they were mobilizing. Kelly Mason had reached out to several of her contacts in local law enforcement, attempting to intimidate families into silence. One evening, as Nick glanced at the growing list of recounted experiences online, he noticed a peculiar notification flood the comment section. A series of usernames began carving sharp threats into the digital landscape, all anonymous but eerily familiar. They echoed the voices of HOA's enforcement team. "We'll make you regret this," one user typed. "You think you're untouchable. You have no idea who you're messing with." Nick's stomach twisted into knots. "Allison, look," he called, drawing her over. She scanned the comments, anger flashing in her eyes. "They are trying to scare us," she said, determination setting in. "But it won't work." Just then, a knock at their door cut through the tension like a shard of glass. Both froze, exchanging a wary glance. Nick crept toward the peephole and saw 3 uniformed officers standing outside. His heart raced. Were they here to intimidate, or worse? Ignoring the knot in his stomach, he opened the door. "Officers, how can I help?" "Mr. Grace," one of them said, stepping forward. He was clean-cut but with a hardened expression. "We need to talk about the complaints we've been receiving regarding your attempts to undermine the HOA. Your discussions are stirring up a lot of trouble." "Trouble?" Nick echoed, incredulity hitting him. "You mean the trouble caused by the HOA choosing to throw bricks through windows?" The lead officer stiffened. "Look, this isn't how it works," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "This is a private association. You need to respect the rules." "Respect the rules?" Nick interjected, anger igniting. "They are abusing their power." The officers exchanged glances, impatience simmering just beneath the surface. "We're here to remind you that we're just doing our jobs, Mr. Grace. Standing up against the HOA could lead to criminal consequences. You should cease your activities immediately." With that, they turned and left, leaving Nick and Allison in stunned silence. The threat hung in the air like static, electrifying their resolve instead of dampening it. "I refuse to back down," Allison declared, her voice stronger than before. "If they want a war, then let's give them one." As the sun set behind the houses of Oakage Drive, shadows crept along the sidewalks, shadows of fear and oppression, but also of resilience. And as the darkness enveloped them, Nick knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't just stand idle. They were in the fight of their lives, and the stakes had never been higher. They were in the fight of their lives, and the stakes had never been higher. In the days that followed, Nick and Allison doubled down on their efforts. The glowing screen of the laptop became their lifeline, each new submission to their shared platform providing fuel to the fire of their determination. Families that had once cowered under the gaze of their HOA were now emboldened to share their experiences. "Look at this," Nick said, scrolling through the growing list of complaints from their site. "We've got over 50 accounts now, and it's only been a week. These people need to be heard." Allison leaned in closer, her eyes scanning each story. "And what if we can get some of them to join us at the next town hall?" she suggested. "If we stand together, maybe they'll see we're not afraid." "Yes, we need to put together a presentation," Nick replied, excitement bubbling in him like soda pop ready to burst. "We can share the stories, show how pervasive this problem is." As they crafted their message, an unexpected knock echoed from their living room. It was cautious yet determined. Nick exchanged a look with Allison, a silent affirmation. More people were reaching out, and together they had strength. He opened the door, revealing an unsettling sight: a group of 5 community members, including Greg, the father who had spoken up at their last meeting. "We want to help." His voice was firm, and the others nodded in agreement. Nick stepped aside, letting them enter. "We were just talking about gathering stories to present at the town hall. You're all in." Absolutely, Greg affirmed. We're tired of being bullied. It's time to fight back. They gathered around the kitchen table, overflowing with determination and caffeine-fueled energy as they brainstormed ideas. Each person shared their experiences, building momentum with every revelation. It felt unstoppable. After hours of planning, Greg looked around and said, "Together, we can bring them down. Show everyone what they've been doing in the dark." "What concerns me," another member, Lisa, chimed in, "is how the HOA will retaliate. They've already made threats against your family." "Nick, what's stopping them from doing something worse?" Nick gritted his teeth. "We can't let fear control us. We'll be visible, we'll be loud, and we will take every precaution. We'll document everything they do." The meeting ended with a plan in place. The energy was palpable. They really felt as if they could make a difference. But as they dispersed into the night, a chilling sensation crept over Nick. He was worried about what retaliation might come next. The following week, anticipation hung thick in the air as Nick prepared for the town hall meeting. The restaurant was buzzing. Community members trickled in, some waving nervously at friends, others casting suspicious glances at the board members who occupied their usual seats at the head table. Nick and Allison arrived early to secure a spot near the front. The atmosphere buzzed with tension, and as residents began sharing their stories, it was clear that the tide was shifting. More neighbors, emboldened by their joint efforts, stood proud. "All I wanted was to plant a small flower garden. Nothing outrageous," one mother recounted, voice shaking but resolute. "But they told me it was against community standards and threatened fines." Another resident added, "We're not criminals. We're just trying to live our lives." The energy in the room soared. As the stories spilled forth, Nick felt renewed determination coursing through him. But they still faced a formidable opponent in Kelly Mason, whose icy facade never wavered as she listened quietly at her table, the HOA board glancing nervously at each other. Then came the moment they'd been waiting for. Greg stood and addressed the assembly. "It's time we took a stand. The HOA isn't just breaking rules, they're breaking families. We have a right to live without fear." A wave of murmurs broke out among the crowd, voices rising in support. "Yes, we are the community," someone shouted. Nick felt Allison grip his hand tightly. "This is it," she whispered, and he knew she was right. The momentum was palpable. When it was finally Nick's turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, heart pounding, hands clammy. But as he looked out at the faces gathered, he felt the quiet strength of those behind him. 2 weeks ago, my son Logan was nearly killed by a brick thrown through our window. He began, each word hitting like a hammer. "We fell victim to an HOA that has lost sight of its purpose. But we're not just victims. We're here to demand change." The room erupted in applause, but Nick pressed on. "We've compiled dozens of stories, each a testament to the HOA overstepping its bounds. And we're not going to stop until the truth is out." Suddenly, a muffled voice snapped back from the corner. "You're just disrupting our community, Nick. You think airing dirty laundry will solve it." Nick recognized Kelly's voice, an attempt to undermine the solidarity in the room. "This isn't just dirty laundry. This is about saving our community from a toxic environment. We've been silent too long, and it's time to be heard." But even as he spoke, a chill clutched at Nick's insides. He saw shadows moving at the back of the room. 2 men he recognized from the HOA's enforcement team. They exchanged glances with Kelly, their expressions darkening. "Don't think you can hide behind your so-called movement," one of them shouted, setting the crowd on edge. "We know where you all live. You tread a dangerous line." Nick's heart raced, and he could see the fear creeping into faces around him. But the fear sparked something else: defiance, courage. "Let them come," Greg shouted, standing beside Nick. "We're not just going to lay down. We're fighting back and uniting our community." Cheers erupted again, vibrating through the restaurant. This was no longer just a discussion. It was war, and every person in the room was ready to fight. As the meeting neared its end, Nick glanced at Allison, their eyes locking in unspoken understanding. They had taken a monumental step toward reclaiming their lives, and together, They were ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant unearthing deeper secrets hidden in the shadows. The rallying cry echoed in Nick's mind as the meeting concluded, wrapping them in a palpable courage that felt almost electric. He could sense the shift in the room that night, a transformation from fear to collective strength. But with every brave face, Nick also felt the weight of uncertainty. Would the HOA come for them? Would they retaliate further? As the crowd dispersed, many lingered to exchange words of support, but the men from the enforcement team hadn't left. They stood silently in a dark corner, their presence a lingering threat. "Nick, we need to talk," Greg said, breaking him from his thoughts. "They've shown their hand. They'll retaliate." "I know," Nick replied, his heart racing as he glanced back at the two enforcers. "But we can't let that silence us. We've got to keep this momentum rolling." With the night's adrenaline still pulsing through them, Nick and Allison gathered their gathered friends and allies to discuss their next steps. They had survived the confrontation, but it was clear the HOA sensed the shift in power. "Maybe we should contact a lawyer," Lisa suggested. "If they start to come after us, legal protection could be crucial." All eyes turned to Nick and Allison, whose anxious expressions turned thoughtful. "It's a good idea," Allison said, her voice steady. "We need to prepare for any counterattacks and make sure we're backed up legally." Over the next few weeks, they met with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, Alexa, whose reputation for taking on powerful organizations was well known. "You're on the right track," she assured them. "If the HOA starts legal action, I'll help you prove that they're operating outside of their bounds." With Alex's guidance, Nick and his neighbors began collecting documented evidence, emails, photos, recordings of meetings with the HOA, a mountain of proof that spoke to a pattern of bullying and intimidation. But a cold shadow seemed to follow their efforts. Unknown to the group, the HOA was watching closely. They began sending warning letters to Nick and some of the participants from that night, threatening legal action over alleged defamation for the tales that began circulating. When Nick first saw one of those letters delivered to his home, the trembling clench of fear returned. "They are trying to intimidate us," he muttered, handing the letter to Allison as he gritted his teeth. Allison read it through, her eyes narrowing. "We won't be silenced." At the next community meeting, spirits ran high despite the HOA's intimidation tactics. "We're not going anywhere," Greg exclaimed. "Each letter they send us just strengthens our resolve. This is our home, and we deserve to be heard." Nick's heart surged as cheers erupted once more, but a sense of caution lingered in the back of his mind. They were heading into uncharted territory, one filled with potential danger and backlash. Still, he knew they had come too far to turn back. Days melted into weeks as they built their case, and with every new gathering, they grew tighter as a community. With every shared story, they unraveled the threads binding them together. Tension filled the air, but so did hope. It was as if they were forged by this conflict, stronger than when they began. Then came one fateful night when a significant part of their networking effort culminated in a startling revelation. An anonymous source, calling themselves the Whisperer, reached out with insider information about the HOA's illicit activities. They claimed that the board had been skimming funds intended for community maintenance and pocketing fines unjustly levied against families. Nick felt a rush of disbelief and excitement. "We have to meet them," he said, gathering his close allies. "This could change everything." The following evening, they convened in a shadowy park to meet the Whisperer. Adrenaline pulsed through Nick's veins as he fidgeted with his hands, hoping they wouldn't have jeopardized their safety. The night was cool, and he knew the weight of the secrets they were about to uncover could tip the battle in their favor. From the darkness stepped a figure clad in a hoodie, their voice low and direct. "I have files that will expose the HOA for what they really are," the Whisperer said, pulling out a briefcase that felt heavier with expectation. "You're fighting against corruption, and now you have the evidence to prove it." Nick's heart raced as he opened the case. Inside were documents and spreadsheets, emails, and photos corroborating everything they suspected about the HOA's misconduct. This is incredible," he breathed in disbelief, finally tasting the sweet flavor of justice. "But be careful," the whisperer warned, glancing nervously around. "They won't take this lying down. You've stirred the hornet's nest, and now they'll come at you harder." Determination surged through Nick's bones as he looked around at the friends gathered with him, their faces lit by dim streetlights, resolute and ready. "Let them come," he said with newfound order. "We have the truth on our side, and together we will bring them down." And with the weight of those documents in hand, Nick realized they were no longer merely defending their community. They were becoming its guardians, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead, united like never before. What had started as a fight against fear had transformed into a wave of change. Together, they stepped into this battle with courage, knowing their strength lay in unity, and ready to confront the secrets that the HOA had desperately wished to keep hidden. The echo of their resolve was as powerful as any warning the HOA could ever mutter, an unstoppable force that would forge a path to justice.